always thought my dad was the most predictable person in the world. He had a routine, a structure to his life that never changed. Every morning, he left for work at exactly 7:30 a.m., coffee in hand, giving my mom a quick peck on the cheek before heading out the door. Evenings were the same. Home by 6 p.m., dinner together, then a little TV before bed. It was the kind of stability that made me feel safe, made me believe our family was solid. But lately things felt off. First, it was subtle. He'd be on his phone more, smiling at messages he didn't share. He started stepping outside to take calls, lowering his voice when we were around. When I asked him about it, he laughed it off, saying it was just work stress. I wanted to believe him. Then there was the cologne. My dad never cared much about how he smelled. He was the kind of guy who stuck to one brand for years, the scent of familiarity. But suddenly, he had a new one, something sharper, something unfamiliar. I noticed my mom did too. The first time I caught a whiff, I made a joke about it. Trying to impress someone, Dad? He chuckled, ruffling my hair, but I caught the way his smile faltered. The biggest shift was his schedule. He started working late, something he never did before. When I asked my mom about it, she said it was normal, part of the job. But the way she said it, too quickly, too rehearsed, made my stomach twist. She knew something. Or maybe she was pretending not to. One evening, I was sitting in the living room when I saw him typing furiously on his phone. His face was tense, focused. The second he noticed me watching, he flipped it over on the couch cushion. I pretended not to care, but my pulse was racing. Something was wrong. A few nights later, he left for a work dinner. I watched my mom, wondering if she'd say anything, but she just nodded and kept folding laundry. That night I barely slept. My mind raced with questions, doubts, fears I wasn't ready to face. And then it happened. The moment that cracked the illusion. He forgot his phone at home. I wouldn't have touched it. I respected his privacy. But when it buzzed, the name on the screen wasn't one I recognized. A simple message popped up. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. My breath caught. My hands trembled. The room around me blurred. Reality twisting into something I didn't want to believe. My dad, the man who had always been steady, always been loyal, was hiding something. And I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth. My hands hovered over the phone, my heart slamming against my ribs. I wasn't supposed to see that message. I wasn't supposed to know. But now that I did, I couldn't unsee it. I stared at the words, my mind scrambling for an explanation that didn't mean what I already knew deep down. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. I needed proof. The next morning I started paying attention in a way I never had before. My dad had always been predictable, but now I saw the cracks. He was dressing differently. Shirts pressed, shoes polished, a fresh haircut when he never cared before. His work schedule had gaps that didn't make sense. The late nights, the sudden weekend errands, the way he pulled away when my mom tried to hug him. I told myself I was imagining it. Until I found the receipts. Crumpled in his car, shoved between the seats. A fancy restaurant, one he never took my mom to. Hotel bar. Flowers, ones that never made it home. My stomach twisted as I smoothed them out, my fingers shaking. I could have confronted him right then, but I needed to be sure. That night, when he left for another supposed work meeting, I followed him. It felt wrong, invasive, but I couldn't stop myself. I stayed far enough behind, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. He didn't go to his office. He didn't even go downtown. He pulled into a small, intimate restaurant across town, the kind of place meant for date nights, not business meetings. And then I saw her. She was younger than my mom, effortlessly beautiful. Her laughter reaching me even through the car window. My dad leaned in close, touching her hand. His face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just an affair. It was something deeper. Something shattered inside me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. My dad had another life, and I wasn't part of it. I didn't even realize I was crying until my vision blurred. My fingers dug into my palms, nails biting into skin. I wanted to storm in, demand answers, make him face what he was doing. But I didn't. I just sat there, watching my father be someone I didn't recognize. By the time he left, I was already gone. I drove aimlessly, my mind spiraling. What was I supposed to do? Tell my mom? Confront him? Pretend I didn't know? Every option felt unbearable. When I finally got home, I felt different, like something inside me had cracked open. My dad walked through the door an hour later. The same warm smile, the same familiar voice. But now it felt like a lie. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know who he really was. I couldn't look at him the same way. Every word out of his mouth felt rehearsed, every smile forced. The weight of what I knew pressed down on me, making it impossible to act normal. My mom hadn't noticed. She still laughed at his jokes, still reached for his hand at the dinner table. And he let her. That was the worst part. He let her believe everything was fine. I wasn't sure how long I could keep the secret. The knowledge burned inside me, making it hard to breathe. Every time he left the house, I wondered if he was going to her. Every time he checked his phone, I imagined her name lighting up the screen. I wanted to scream, to throw the truth in his face, to force him to admit what he was doing. I didn't plan the confrontation. Just happened. He was in the kitchen, rinsing a plate, humming like everything was normal. And I snapped. Who is she? My voice came out steadier than I expected, but inside I was shaking. He turned, confused at first, then wary. What are you talking about? I held up the receipts, my hands trembling. Don't lie to me. I know. His face drained of color. He looked at me like I was someone else, like I had caught him off guard for the first time in his life. He opened his mouth, closed it, then sighed. It's not what you think. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Really? Because it looks like you're cheating on Mom. His eyes flickered with something. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But not denial. He didn't even try to lie. He just rubbed a hand over his face and leaned against the counter. It's complicated. Felt sick. He wasn't even going to deny it. He wasn't going to fight for the illusion. Does Mom know? I asked, my voice quieter now, almost afraid of the answer. His hesitation told me everything. And then, before he could speak, another voice cut through the room. Yes. We both turned. My mom stood in the doorway, her face unreadable. My stomach dropped. She knew. She had known. And she hadn't said anything. I expected tears, anger, something. But she just stared at my dad, something heavy and exhausted in her expression. How long did you think you could keep this from them? Not just me. My chest tightened. What does that mean? Neither of them answered. My dad looked away. My mom sighed. And in that silence, the walls of my family started to collapse. I felt like the ground had been ripped from under me. My mom knew. She had known this whole time and said nothing. The betrayal doubled, twisting into something worse than I had imagined. How long? My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. My mom looked at me, then at my dad. He wouldn't meet her eyes. She exhaled slowly, like she had been preparing for this moment for a long time. A year, she admitted. A year. I couldn't breathe. You just let it happen. My throat tightened around the words. You let him cheat on you. She didn't flinch. It's not that simple. I wanted to scream that it was. That marriage was supposed to mean something. That love was supposed to mean something. But the way she looked at me, like she had already lived through the anger, the heartbreak, the pain I was just now feeling, made me hesitate. You think I didn't fight? She asked quietly. You think I didn't cry, beg, threaten to leave? I did. And then I realized something. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to understand. But she kept going anyway. I wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Chill ran through me. My stomach twisted. What does that mean? She hesitated just for a second, and in that pause I knew. My world was about to break apart even more. I've been seeing someone too, she admitted. The words knocked the air from my lungs. My hands clenched into fists. I looked at my dad, expecting rage, but there was none. No shock. No fury. Just acceptance. "You knew," I whispered. He nodded, finally looking at me. "We have an understanding." An understanding. Like this was normal. Like this was okay. My entire life I had believed in this perfect family, in the love my parents shared. And in one night, I had learned it was all a lie. They had been pretending, playing a role, smiling for my sake while they both lived separate lives. Felt sick. So what now? My voice was hollow. They looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Then my mom spoke. "Nothing changes. Nothing changes." I stared at them, at these strangers who had raised me, and realized something. Maybe nothing changed for them. Maybe they were fine living like this. But I wasn't. I turned, walking away before they could say anything else. I didn't need to hear more. Because in that moment, I understood the worst part of all. The betrayal wasn't just theirs. It was mine too. For believing in them,